So today I'd like to begin going through the book of Job. It's going to be a survey, especially the first part of the book of Job. We aren't going to go through it necessarily verse by verse because we want to try to make it through it. You know, there's 42 chapters. If we spent just 1 minute on each chapter, you have a whole sermon, and that's just on each chapter. And there's whatever 15, 20 verses per chapter. So it could obviously take a long time. I'd like to get through it in a little more, at a little better pace, and say, hit the highlights on the chapters as we go through it. Point out a few things as we're going, and then as we get towards the end, then start going to it a little more in depth. We want to lay the groundwork first, and then start. We'll make some points along the way, but then come to some conclusions towards the end as we start to wrap things up, and maybe even after we're finished. Job, I would say, is a highly misunderstood book, and it's one of the reasons I'm talking about it, because, again, a lot of these things are born out of a conversation, and in the conversation, there were many misunderstandings that came out from the other party that I was talking to about Job and the purpose of the book and Job's nature and so on. Of course, a lot of this stuff is interpreted elsewhere in the Bible, but again, you have to read at least the whole book of Job to understand a lot of these things. You cannot just assume that because one thing is said at the beginning that you can go ahead and make a whole theology on it. What you have to do is you have to put things together and understand it a lot of times in its context, and because we don't always understand the original Hebrew and the way that the translators translated, we have to look at study. In other words, we have to look at these things carefully, and again, like the Bible is laid out anyway, it's a little here and a little there. So let's begin in Job 1 and verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. So this man was blameless and upright. Okay, this is more or less a phrase that meant that he was a man of high ethical and moral character. It did not mean that he was a completely sinless man, because we have, well, first off, Romans 3:23, one of our memorization verses, that says that all men have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So we know that this has to marry up. And what he's not saying here is that Job was perfect. And as we go through, we'll see, obviously, there is a lesson for Job that he has to learn, and that he wasn't perfect. So we know that he was not completely without blame and completely upright. In fact, one of the qualifications of a minister is to be blameless. Right? And again, that does not mean to be perfect and without sin. So I think we can see that, again, this can be a point of contention, but that he was not perfect. But that being said, Job was a man who understood the law of God, and we'll see that he even understood the plan of God. And as we go through, Job's contention is that, I have been living by all the rules, right? So, when he looks at the commandments, and you're going, okay, I have honored my parents, while they were alive. If they were still alive at this time, I still honor them. I don't kill, steal, commit adultery, or covet. Okay, so I'm not doing any of that, and I'm keeping the Sabbath, and I'm not taking God's name in vain or worshiping idols, and God's my only God. So I've been doing all those things, and he's very adamant, as we'll see that we go through here, that he has been doing what he was supposed to be doing. Yet, again, there are others around him going, I don't know about that. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But the point being is that, yes, he was a man of high ethical and moral character. And he was rich and well off, as we see in verses 2 and 3. But his kids seem to be a bit off the track. In verses 4 and 5, he said his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day. Again, some believe that's a reference to birthdays. And would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Well, that seems all, well and good, but then we see in verse 5 that when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And so Job did this regularly. So he had some reason to believe that the kids were not doing what they were supposed to be doing, especially on these appointed days. And this is the reason some people say birthdays are bad, just FYI. So again, he understood, and they throw this in here for a reason. And again, some of these things become more apparent as we read along. But verse 6, it says, now, there was a day when the sons of God, again, that refers to angels. In fact, if you want to put Job 38, 4 and 7, 38 verses 4 and 7, even beside that, it's a good reference there, because one is that you see that the sons of God shouted for joy in verse 7, when it said that the morning stars sang together. And why did they do that? It was at the creation of the earth. And so we see two things really in these verses. One is that the creation of angels predated the creation of the earth, and also that whenever we see this is that he calls them the sons of God. And again, that shouldn't be a real far stretch, considering he was their father in terms of creating them. He created them, and they were for him. And so it's a kind of symbolic reference for them as well, but not to be misunderstood that for some reason this is talking about humans or men at this point in time. So they presented themselves, and again, we see this as part of their job as angels. Angel means messengers, and they were servants of God doing their jobs. They were coming before him, and they presented themselves, and Satan came among them as well. All right, so now here he is. He's there. He kind of wants to be in on the action, as it were. And an interesting conversation then ensues in verse 7. It says, and the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? And Satan answered to the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, which was his domain. As we've known, he was thrown to the earth, back down to the earth when he tried to exalt himself. And he's walking back and forth on it. And God said to Satan, all right, so there's this little play that goes between the two of them. Of course, Satan thinks that he's getting the best of God, but God's the one who brings up the subject to begin with, which is interesting in this. And we also have to keep this all framed properly. He says, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So this is God's assessment of Job. All right, so and again, we have God's word, and we're going to go with that first and foremost, and you'll see why a few chapters later. So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? So again, he's trying to play a game here, and said, of course, Job is good, because, and he says, you've set a hedge around him. Verse 10, around his household, around everything on every side. You've blessed the work of his hands. So it was God that, Job was working, but God was blessing it. And his possessions have increased in the land. But now, stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. So this is the bet, right? Satan says, well, look, of course, if you remove your hand from this portion of his life, he's going to curse you to his face. I bet you for sure this is what he's going to do. And then verse 12, the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, so what we see here in this passage is that Satan truly is the accuser of the brethren. He's wandering to and fro. He is, again, taking note of everything that we do. He's going to use it in every way possible, and he's going to use every argument possible, especially the legitimate ones, and that means the ones that we give him reason. He's going to he'll accuse us falsely, and he'll accuse us rightly sometimes. But here we go, and he says, okay, I bet you that he will do this. And now, one of the interesting things here to note is that God is using Satan to accomplish these things. And Satan is more or less a willing participant in this. Satan thinks he's going to accomplish his stuff, and it seems that he's not even aware of what God is trying to accomplish in Job. And I don't want to give away the end of the story just yet. But nonetheless, Satan willingly helps God out, as it were, to help Job with Job's problem. But Satan, his only thing that I think he can see in front of him is that he's bound and determined and resolved to destroy Job in any way he can. So what we also see in this section is that Satan recognizes God's protection of his people, and that God has set a hedge about, and that also God limits Satan in what Satan can do. A lot of people believe that there's this ongoing fight between God and Satan, and Satan's putting a little fast one on God, and that God must blink or turn his head around and Satan does what he's going to do. It's not that way. God is completely in control, and he is the one that says, okay, Satan, you can only go this far, and Satan says, okay. Basically Satan knows. It's not even a question. It's not even that Satan even tries to go beyond that in terms of what he is allowed to do. So then, verse 13 through 19, we see how Satan can work. Okay, so God gave him free rein to do this. He said, you can do all this stuff. You just can't hurt him. You can't lay a hand on him. Notice what Satan does, how Satan works. He caused the Sabaeans in verse 15 to raid. All right, and they killed the servants. This is how Satan works. All right, these people were motivated by Satan, incentivized. They were, Satan foisted his attitude, his ways on them, and motivated them to go and do these wrong things. That's, again, an insight onto how Satan can work in the lives of men. Verse 16, fire from heaven, which burned up the sheep and the servants. You're going, okay, so he has control. I'm not even sure what that is. It's as it were, the fire of God, it's called here. It comes down from heaven, and something that, again, we don't see. I don't know that I've ever heard of. In fact, outside of the Bible, it's been in the past and it's going to be in the future. But nonetheless, verse 17, he motivates the Chaldeans to go and kill and to raid them. And then he has power over the weather in verse 19, a great wind. So Satan can use these things. Okay, so we need to be cognizant of this in the world and what's going on, and to explain things, as well as in our lives. That Satan, if he has his power, and he does, to sway the whole world and to motivate, that it can be to turned on us as well. But it's just, I think, very interesting that says, okay, how does Satan do things? He didn't just go down there and go right in front of him and do stuff to him. He used other instruments to accomplish what he had to do. Then, verse 20 through 22, we see Job's reaction to this calamity. And we're speeding through this because I think most of us know the story, but I do encourage you to go back and read these things on your own time and to see them in the light of what we're talking about, and to, again, understand them in the light of what's going on in your life as well. So how does he react to these trials that do not affect his person? Well, he fell to the ground and he worshiped God. Again, this should be one of the things that we do too in the face of trials, is that we look to God for help and understanding, as we should always be looking to him. And his outlook was philosophical. His outlook was, again, one that showed understanding. He says, the Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, he says. So look, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong, in verse 22. So here it is. Satan says, he says to God, I can do this. He'll curse you to his face if you just let me do this. Well, Job understood how things worked, okay, up to this point. So it's Job 1, Satan 0. So Satan fails. This is the exact opposite of what Satan was trying to accomplish. Job turned to God and looked to God for direction. Now, of course, in our own lives, we can assume that this scenario repeats itself with Satan going before God, and instead of Job's name, he's putting your name there, and that he's trying to accuse you, and he's trying to do these things. So the question is then, what do you do when Satan comes against you. Now, chapter 2, 1 through 3, we see a similar meeting as last time. And then verse 4, Satan says to the Lord, said, skin for skin. So now he has to ask God again. We see he acknowledges the limitations that he had before. He couldn't go and do that, but he wants to do it. But he doesn't do it. He says, a man, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. And he says, stretch out your hand, touch his bone and flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. The same thing again, if you just let me do this. And God said to Satan, his life's in your hand, but spare his life. So, okay, you can go and touch his person, but there's more limitations that are set upon you. So again, it should be of some comfort to us to understand and to know that God is intimately involved in our lives to the point that he limits what Satan can and can't do. And the things that do happen are for a reason. Then, of course, shows more of what Satan is capable of in verses 7 and 8. That he had these painful boils, and he took a potsherd, and he was scraping them off with a broken piece of pot that kind of has a bit of an edge on it to scrape them off. Now it says a boil. I don't know exactly, what this was or how it was manifest, or if they even knew exactly what it was. But have I told you my boil story once before? I have to say that because I know I've told a few of you, but I got this one boil one time at camp, and it was just one boil, and man, it caused me to run a fever. I was miserable. I had a headache. You could feel the poisons from the boil that they were kind of moving around your system. Your body's trying to take care of them, and it was on the side of my leg, and it was super sensitive that you couldn't lay on it in a soft bed, and so I don't know how people sleep, but you turn over, you sleep, and you sleep on this side or that side, but it's like I couldn't turn one way, and it's very disturbing of your sleep. And it seemed like every table was exactly the height of the boil that I had, and so whenever I walked by a table, it's like and hit it. Again, you don't realize how much you kind of feel for things as you walk around and bump into them, but it felt like a knife being pushed, or maybe more like, I don't know if his knife never had a knife, but definitely a needle, just pushing straight into you, and you get this shot of adrenaline and you nearly drop to your knees. Okay, that was one boil. He had him from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. It was a bad situation to understate it. But verses 9 and 10, Job further demonstrates how he understands God, and that in terms of who and what God is. And he said to his wife, do you still hold fast? His wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. She wanted him to do what Satan wanted Job to do. He said to her, you speak like a foolish woman. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? So in all of this, Job did not sin with his lips, right? He had tamed the tongue at this point, one of the most uncontrollable members of the body, as James talks about, and yet he had it under control. Now, verse 11. We come to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who had heard about his troubles. And they came in verse 11 to mourn and to comfort him. Okay, that's why they came. They came to comfort him in his trial. They had heard, and again it was Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. So again, from these things you can figure, if they're from the area that they say they're from, that it seems like they came from everywhere between Turkey and Arabia over in the Middle East. And when they got there to him, they did not recognize him. Okay? And I'm not going to be real graphic about the end of my boil as it was coming to a head, as it were. But let's just suffice it to say that one boil was very, very messy. Okay? And here we have a whole bunch of boils to the point where they can't even recognize him, because I'm sure that they're weeping, and we'll see some more descriptions of it later. But they lifted up their voice and wept, and this is a bad, bad situation that has come upon him, so much that they tore off their robe and sprinkled dust on their head. So they sat down on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word, for they saw that his grief was great. So they came there, and what we're going to see now is that Job has this trial to go through, and he has a support group. Okay, now these guys, according to one of the commentaries, says that they were kings, that they were, leaders or governors of their area and region. So they were all men of high position. And again, and that take it or leave it, or take it for what it's worth. But nonetheless, it may explain why these guys acted the way they did. Because I always find that whenever you have somebody in a high position, that they believe that they got there because they're something special, because they're super smart, or that they deserve it, and which is not always the case. And I see this among athletes and actors all the time too, is that they become famous, and so they believe that they can say whatever they want, and it's the truth, because otherwise how would they be able to shoot a 3-point basket if everything that they said was not the truth of beyond truth, the one that really knows. So here we have these guys who were called, again, according to the Septuagint, king of the Temanites, and Tyrannus, or governor of the Sacheans, and king of the Manaeans. So again, I say take it for what it's worth. Then chapter 3, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. So we see again that this, again, people make this this association between him talking about his birthday here and the birthday that happened back with the with his kids, and that there's a reason for that. And I'm sure birthdays can get way out of hand. I'm not exactly sure, and how they kept it back in those days, and what was exactly going on. But nonetheless, it's interesting that they bring it up a couple times. But here he is. He say, "May the day perish on which I was born, the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it." So we kind of come to a point, this may be the closest point that we get to, where Job is just, okay, and there's some time that has passed here. In fact, just have a quick look at chapter 7, verse 3. Chapter 7, verse 3 is not a lot of time that has allotted between chapter 7 and the time that we're looking at right now. In fact, it could be very, very short time in terms of less than an hour. But he goes, "I have been allotted months of futility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me." Okay, so back to chapter 3, we see that this has already been going on, the trials that he's had, it's been going on for months. And so here he is, he has, after the 7 days and 7 nights, he finally blurts this out, and he's going, okay, yeah, I'm not cursing God, but man, God, what were you thinking when you allowed me to be born? So this is about as close as I think it gets to Satan, or to Job accomplishing what Satan wanted. But Satan does not get the victory here, and basically we don't see Satan's hand per se anymore in these subsequent chapters. But not to suffice it to say, though, that Job stays covered and boils. So we'll call this one Job 2, Satan 0, but the trial goes on. Now, verse 23, Job is saying, "Why is light given to a man who is hidden, whom God has hedged in?" So again, it's interesting as we go through this that we see these things that was happening between Satan and God that Job wasn't privy to, but yet Job has an incredible amount of insight. And this is one of the things that he realized, that God had set a hedge around him, and that if God can put a hedge, that God can remove a hedge. So he has incredible insight. And again, we look at these things and you say, okay, Job's kind of like this single guy out in the middle of nowhere. How does he know anything about God? But yet, here it is, that's not the case. He actually has great insight to how God works, and even to a large degree, a certain insight to that conversation that happened that he wasn't privy to. Of course, now that is up to this point in verse 25. He says, "For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me." So here we see, as it were, a chink in the armor. He says, "I greatly feared." A Christian does not live in fear. We've had sermons about that, about fear, about worrying, and how it comes from a lack of faith. And here we have Job. He's been worrying, quote unquote, about this day for a long time, that this day would come upon him. And what did we read? I think it was just last week, that sufficient are the troubles of today, that we shouldn't be worrying about the future. So we see this one part here, this one thing, and we'll come back to it as we make our way through the book of Job, but that he feared this would come upon him. Okay, so he worried about these trials, and we talked about that last week. But again, we don't need to worry about the things. If they do happen, okay, if they don't happen, then all the worrying's been in vain. And if they do happen, then it is because God is in charge and God is working in our lives. And so what we have here is that if he was truly living in fear of this happening, then it was something that God was going to have to deal with, if only because he was worrying about it and fearing about some of these things happening. So again, the lesson for us is, are we going to worry about these things to the point that God actually has to do something about our worrying? Continuing on in chapter 4 and verse 7, now we have Eliphaz. Eliphaz, who is the older one, speaks up first. They've been there for 7 days, and now he wants to give his insight into the matter. He wants to, again, he was supposed to be there for comfort, but he wants to, again, maybe he thinks this is the way that he's going to comfort him. As we will see, this is not the case for him or the other two. In fact, let's quickly frame all the advice that Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad gave him in chapter 42, verses 7 and 8. Job 42, verses 7 and 8. And again, this is going to help us to view through a lens what is being said by these three men, and to a certain degree what is being said by Job. So Job 42 and verse 7. "And so it was, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, that the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, My wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." So the things that they were saying to Job was not correct. But Job was acting in the right way. "So now therefore take for yourselves 7 bulls, 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering," which was typically for sin, "and my servant Job shall pray for you. For I will accept him, lest I deal with you according to your folly, to your sin, what you did wrong. Because you have not spoken of me what is right, and my servant Job has." All right, so it is through that lens. Okay, we don't have to now go back and say, okay, well, was this good advice or bad advice? Let's go back to chapter 4 and verses 7 and 8 and look what Eliphaz has to say right off the bat. He says, "Remember now, who ever perished being innocent? Or where were the upright ever cut off? Even as I have seen it, those who plow iniquity sow trouble and reap the same." So here we have Eliphaz. He's basically, what is he saying to Job? He's saying, I've not seen these things come on the innocent. He said, you obviously did something wrong. That is why this is happening to you. So if you plow iniquity, if you are out there sinning, then you're going to reap trouble. And he's stating this as this is a hard and fast rule of life. And again, he's speaking for God in many situations here as we go through this. He is saying, well, this is the way God works. So if you were innocent, this wouldn't be happening to you. So it's an accusation that Eliphaz makes. It's a sin for him to say this. And it's basically his theme throughout the time that he speaks as well as the others. And to them, it's an open and shut case as to why this is happening. So when we go through these words that they're saying to Job, we find that they're not necessarily wrong words, they're misapplied words. Okay? So when they say some of these things, it's not that some of these things are not the truth. It's just it doesn't apply to Job. So the words that Eliphaz spoke in verses 7 and 8 were not applicable to Job. Now, does that happen otherwise? Can it happen in other ways? Yeah, for sure, it can. But it did not apply to Job. He assumed that it did and was making false accusations against a man that God had called blameless and upright. So in that sense, he was going against God. And again, that's not a smart position to be in, as we have already seen. So for us, what is the takeaway? And the takeaway is going to be, and it should be, as we go through these things, there's a trial that Job is going through, and then there are those who are not going through the trial who are trying to help out the person going through the trial. So there's going to be lessons for us to, as we go through trials, and there's lessons for us as we try to help others in their trials. And again, in this case, as we've already seen, the ones who were trying to help were well out of sorts. They were not doing what was right. In fact, they were sinning. And so they had come ostensibly to comfort and to mourn. And yet, this is what they were doing. It was not helpful advice. In fact, as we move to chapter 5, we find that the remarks are quite callous. And it was not a word fitly spoken, like the Proverbs talks about. And he would give out advice that just wasn't helpful either. And again, I don't know if these guys were just not good at comforting, or if they had ulterior motives, or if they wanted to show how right and how good they were and how much they understood God, and try to help Job, who, again, I'm sure had a reputation, because here he has these three men, ostensibly kings or leaders, coming to him. In verse 8, Eliphaz says, if it was me, I would seek God. And to God I would commit my cause. In other words, I'd go before God and I would pray. And you're kind of just going, okay, seriously, it's been months. You think for a second that I've just been sitting here doing nothing? That I have not gone and prayed? I mean, that's not helpful advice. In fact, if anything, it's, kind of demeaning advice. Then verse 17, behold, happy is the man whom God corrects. Therefore do not despise the chastening of the Almighty. So he's continuing in this same vein. He said, you should be happy with the correction that you're getting. Because I know you did something wicked. And you need to be chastised for it. Then verse 25, back to the insensitivity. He says, you shall also know that your descendants shall be many, and your offspring shall be like grass of the earth. He said that after all his kids been killed in the house. I don't know if it was all of them. There's some thought that maybe 2 of them actually were not there and survived. But nonetheless, he had all of the kids at that time that were in the house that died, and there were many. And he goes, you shall come to your grave at a full age, as a sheaf of grain ripens in season. And as we see that at this age, Job was not of full age, because at the very end he goes on and lives another 140 years after the trial is over. So again, he's saying, here he is looking like he's at death's door, and as we get through some of these other chapters, we're going to see that he is actually believing that himself. But here he is. He said, well, look, if you didn't have anything wrong, you'd live to a ripe old age. And it looks like you're about to die, so obviously you must be doing something wrong. And this is the kind of help, and that's the point, that Eliphaz is handing out. And then chapter 6. We have Job's response to Eliphaz. Because, Eliphaz is sitting there all pretty proud of himself, thinking he's judged this situation rightly, and he was the oldest among them there. And Job says in verse 3, "For then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash." So he admits that some of his words were out of place at this point. Again, you need to control yourself. You need to understand, not let the emotion of the situation of the trial get the better of you. Verse 8, "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for." Okay, so he doesn't believe that he can go on here. Obviously he can, because we know the end of the story. But the trial goes on, and he survives. But what we see is that his focus is still wrong. He's focused here on the what and not the why. He said, he thinks he knows what it is that he should be asking for and how he should be approaching this. Yet, he's not looking at the right thing. And then he says to them, you guys aren't helping. Verses 14 and 15. "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers have dealt deceitfully, like a brook, like the streams of the brook that pass away." So he's saying, and these are, again, pretty direct words, because now what we're seeing is that we're going to begin to see Job's frame of mind as he goes through this, and how he's perceiving the situation as opposed to the way that they're perceiving. At the end of the day, okay, even Job is not perceiving it correctly. He's not sinning, right? Like these other guys who are actually perceiving it incorrectly and making false accusations. So in the trials period, we need to pray that we are the kind of help that the person needs, and we need to be careful not to overstep our boundaries of propriety, or more importantly, overstep the bounds of God. We cannot be presumptuous to know that we know what God is doing. Often we don't know what God is doing in our own life, even though we're intimately involved with it. We're in our own life 24/7. How are you going to know for sure what it is that somebody else is going through, or why they're going through it, when you're not there in their life and you don't even know your own life that well? Then verse 24 and 25, "Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forceful are right words, but what does your arguing prove?" So it seems like these guys, did the most for Job when they sat there quietly for 7 days. Their words were not accurate, so they didn't bring the comfort that they needed to bring, that Job desired when he was in the middle of a trial. So Job is looking forward to the end of his trial. He believes that there's going to be an end to it, and that he deserves to come out of it. Right? So he's still really not sure what's going on, but he wants the trial to be over. Then chapter 7, verses 1 through 4. "Is there not a time of hard service for a man on earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man? Like a servant who earnestly desires the shade? Like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages?" So Job, the book of Job is in the writings. It's called, we have the law, the prophets, and the writings of the Old Testament. And Job does not fall into the law or prophets. It falls into the writings, which tend to be a lot of prose and poetry, and like the Psalms were. And what we find in Job that is written in very much a poetic way. And so sometimes we have to look at it a little more carefully to see exactly what he's saying. But he said, look, I like a man who has worked hard and deserves his wages. He deserves what's due. He deserves an answer. So do I, Job, know that I have lived, through this trial right now. Now it's time to come out of it, and it's time to give me an answer for what's going on. In verse 3, we come back to that same verse, that I've been allotted months of futility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. Like I was talking about, there's no real good sleeping with boils. When I lie down, I say, when shall I rise and the night be ended? For I have had my fill of tossing till the dawn. So a very similar type of thing. But the trial was for a reason. And it can't be over until God sees the growth in him that he expects. So God is not going to end the trial just because you say, I've had enough, I've done enough, this is enough, right? It's kind of, to me, like saying, I want patience and I want it now, right? The thing is, and it might even be a good example too, is that say you are this man, or you can put a woman in there if you want, that has led a good life, okay? And he has been keeping the commandments. And that's all well and good. And Job was this man. He was not doing, as it were, something wrong. But if God, for instance, sees in us that we are the same and that we need more patience, okay, let's not say that the patience we have is necessarily inadequate. I mean, it's that we do have patience. But say God thinks you need more patience. In this, what is it that you did wrong to require this? Well, in some respects you didn't. You were human. God is working with us to bring us to a certain point. But nonetheless, the trial is going to be over when God wants it to be over, when he sees what he is trying to accomplish in you become accomplished. So again, if you need more patience, then it's not going to stop just because you want it to stop. It's not going to stop until you get to that point, until you've learned what it is that God wants you to learn and the lessons that he expects. Now, verse 5, we do, and I'll read this because it's in the Bible, just how bad it was that he, the illness or his condition was. He says, my flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. So it's, again, I take that to be fairly literal, that, if indeed it was the boils, any kind of boil that we know about, and the weeping that has happened, and how tender it is, that there's not much you can sit in. I don't know if you've ever thought about sitting in a pile of ashes, but I can't imagine anything softer. They're super fluffy. I'm not even sure how you could get enough to sit in, but you're going to sit into something like that is super soft, and then it's going to start caking on you. And then again, they didn't have any type of Obamacare back then, so he just had to sit there and wait. And it looks like these worms were now festering, or starting to become a part of it. So you can imagine when these guys walked up, just how bad he looked. And again, I'm not trying to add too much to it here, but it was not good. And you could see why he thought he was going to die, why they thought he was going to die, and why he felt like he was going to die, and how bad it was. And that it would, it was supernatural in the way it came upon him, and it would have to be supernatural in the way it would disappear if it was going to go away. And then verse 20, we start seeing more of this mindset that Job has. He's answering the guys that are speaking to him. He goes, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O catcher of man? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. Again, I don't think he believes that he has sinned in any way, shape, or form. Okay, it has not been, and again, we'll talk about this more, it hasn't necessarily been a sin of an action in terms of externally, the way he went and broke one of the commands. What we're going to see, though, is that it's an internal way that he was or that he wasn't that needed to change. And what he's still focused on, he still keeps saying, I haven't done anything wrong. And yet, they insist it must be something because they know better than he does. So then, chapter 8, Bildad speaks for the first time. And he says, how long are you going to speak these things? How long are you going to talk like that? How long are you going to say these type of things? And the words of your mouth be like a strong wind. You know, so Bildad comes out of the gate firing. You can imagine after they sat there for 7 days, what they were coming to the conclusion. You know, they come to these conclusions. Then Bildad, or this is the first one, Eliphaz. Yeah, it says, you know, all that he has to say. Even Job answers, and then Bildad says, "Wait, okay, hold on. You're like a strong wind. It's like, you know, you're blustery. The words coming out of your mouth are like hot air." He says, you know, and we look at this situation and going, okay, is this the type of comfort that Job needs, that he's wanting? He's saying just the opposite. So he takes it upon himself then to answer these questions that Job is asking to God at the end of the chapter 7 there. And he's being very presumptuous in this. He says, does God subvert judgment? In other words, isn't he judging you for this? Isn't this why this is happening? Or does the Almighty pervert justice? If your sons have sinned against him, and they, again, the implication is that they had, right, because he's offering the burnt offerings, he has cast them away for their transgression. He did that for a reason. That's the reason that God was executing this judgment on them. And it's the reason that he's executing it on you, because we know that they were sinners, and obviously you're a sinner too. If you would just earnestly seek God, verse 5, and make your supplication to the Almighty, this would all be better. This would all go away. Again, you know, we've already addressed that. Of course, this is what Job is doing and has been doing. And again, even in the questions it reflects, the questions that Job asks, you know, and a lot of them I think are meant to be somewhat rhetorical, but nonetheless, I think in the end, he's going to have all these questions answered. And then verse 20, behold, God will not cast away the blameless, nor will he uphold the evildoers. What is Bildad saying at this point? He's saying, of course, you know, God doesn't get, you know, he takes care of his people. He takes care of the innocent and the blameless and the righteous. So, but you're being cast away, so what does that mean? It means that you have blame and that you are an evildoer, even though God said the exact opposite. So then chapter 9, you get Job's reply to Bildad. And this is what happens, is that they speak in an order and then Job replies, and this continues to go on through several chapters. But I just want to go through and continue to highlight just some of the things in the chapter. So beginning of chapter 9, he says, Job answered and said, truly, I know it is so. So now, what he's saying here, this is what I was saying before, is that, okay, I understand that the principle of what you're saying, that those are correct. Okay, the principles are correct. But what I'm telling you is that the application is incorrect. So these men were saying things that were true. It just did not apply to Job. He says, continuing in verse 2, how can a man be righteous before God? If one wished to contend with him, he could not answer him, this speaking of God, one time out of 1,000. So, if this was in court, this is what Job is saying right here, where he wants to contend with God. Okay, we're starting to see more insight as to how he's feeling, the frustration of not knowing what it is, because he feels that he has been righteous in all these things. He wants to go before God, as it were, in a court and say, I want to contend with him. I want to have my day in court. I want to put forth my case before God. And he's saying, look, God's the one who brought the suit, though. So, of course, it has to be a righteous suit, because God would not be doing these things for an unrighteous reason. And then, again, another point that's somewhat prescient is the fact that he could not answer him one time out of 1,000. So in this court of law, as it were, if God comes back and cross-examines him and asks him these questions, then there's a one time out of 1,000, then maybe I can actually give him an answer to these questions. And the interesting thing is, of course, that as we know and get ahead of the story, is that God does ask him a lot of questions, and he doesn't have an answer. So this is true, and he knows these things. That's exactly what happens later. And then verses 8 through 10, Job says some deep things here, some truth. God spreads out the heavens. He treads on the waves of the sea. I found that one interesting. That, again, God walks on the waves of the sea. What does that bring to memory? Christ did walk on the waves later. He made the Bear, Orion, and Pleiades, the chambers of the south. He does great things past finding out. So here it is that Job is even admitting that some of the things God does, i.e. what he's doing in his own life, could be past finding out. Yet Job here is realizing that he doesn't know. But then he turns right around verse 15 and he says things like this. For though I were righteous, I could not answer him. He says, okay, I might not know the answers to these questions, but I am still righteous. Okay? To me, when somebody says something like that, you jump to the side, right? Because lightning's just about to strike. He says, I could not answer him. I would beg mercy of my judge. If I called and he answered, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice. He crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. Okay, Job, which is it? He's going back and forth here. And look, I'm not going to be real tough on Job here, because obviously these guys were tough on him, and they had a retribution from God, as it were, would have had Job not interceded. But here he is, in pain and agony. It's been months, and this is on top of all the trials that had already happened before. And he's saying that God's doing this for no reason, because I am righteous. So I think we're beginning to see more and more of what Job's problem is. And then continuing on, he makes these desperate statements and despondence, verses 19 to 22. If it's a matter of strength, indeed he is strong, and if of justice, who will appoint my day in court? So again, he still wants this day in court. He wants to tell God, look, I didn't do anything wrong. Though I were righteous, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I were blameless, it would prove me perverse. I am blameless, yet I do not know myself. I despise my life. It's all one thing, therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. And so this was an answer to Bildad as well as to God. And then verse 32, he makes another somewhat prescient statement. He says, for he is not a man that as I am, that I may answer him. I can't just, go right before him like he can the local judge. And that we should go to court together. He says, I would love it if I had that. Then, for sure, God and I could talk this out and he would see. And of course, be careful what you wish for, because indeed that is what happens towards the end. So Job is fed up with it all, and he has this to say to God in chapter 10, verse 20 and 21. Are not my days few? Cease, leave me alone, that I may take a little comfort before I go to the place from which I shall not return, to the land of darkness and the shadow of death. So he wanted to just die. God, he said, God, leave me alone. Just let it all be over. I'm fed up with this. I don't understand what's going on. It's becoming too much for me to bear. Do these words ring true for us, in the trials that we go through? And again, I think it would behoove us during times of great trials, to go back, because the things that he continues to say, and we're not going to go over all of them, are things that I'm sure that we say, when we go through trials. But again, we need to go through this and start having a look at how we are supposed to view trials. Then, chapter 11, Zophar speaks for the first time. He says, should not the multitude of words be answered, and should a man full of talk be vindicated? So he says, okay, Job, you've had your say. Let me tell you how it is. So Eliphaz was bad, Bildad was worse, and Zophar is the worst when it comes to the intensity of the things that he has to say, as well as what he says. Again, they're all basically still saying the same thing. Verse 3, should your empty talk make men hold their peace? So Job is saying all these things, and he's just downright demeaning him, saying, no, the things that you're saying don't hold water. And when you mock, should no one rebuke you? So the things you say, even though maybe you're being rhetorical, maybe you're being poetic, maybe you're mocking, but you need to be rebuked for that. And I'm just the person to do it. So you've had your say. My doctrine is pure, I'm clean in your eyes, but oh, that God would speak and open his lips against you, that he would show you the secrets of wisdom, for they would double your prudence. Know therefore that God exacts from you less than your iniquity or sin deserves. So do we see what he's saying to Job? That after all Job has been through, with the loss of lives, animals, and property, and this illness, this condition that he has that he's going through, he says, you know what? You actually deserve worse. So comforting, Zophar. So comforting. That was not really the way to win friends and influence people. So then in chapter 12, Job answers all three of them. He says, no doubt you are people. You are the people, and wisdom will die with you. That is dripping with sarcasm, right? He says, when you three die, there will not be wisdom left in the earth, because you have it all, and it's just going to go down into the ground with you. But, he says, I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Indeed, who does not know such things as these? Again, you're stating the obvious in a lot of the stuff you're saying. And not only that, but you're stating it incorrectly. I am one mocked by his friends. You were supposed to be here to mourn and comfort me. Came from a long way to be with me, to help me. But, I'm mocked by you. Who called on God and he answered them. The just and blameless who is ridiculed. So again, this is the way he refers to himself, as being just. Okay, being made right, righteous, and blameless. And he is, in his mind, without sin. And you are ridiculing me. So then, verse 2, he says, what you know, I also know. I'm not inferior, right? In chapter 13, in verse 2. So he repeats that again. In verse 4, he says, but you are forgers of lies. You are all worthless physicians. Okay, so again, I'm not sure if that's the Boyles talking, or if he's just kind of getting fed up with these guys. But this is what he felt. So first off, they're lying. They're making these false accusations. And they're not aiding in his well-being. They're not helping him in what he needs. They're not comforting him. And a lot of this, again, is because he really feels that he has a case to be made. He really believes that he has this leg to stand on. In verse 3 of chapter 13, he says, but I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. Surely the two of us can get together and talk this out, and he would see reason. See now, verse 18, verse 18, it says, see now, I have prepared my case. I know that I shall be vindicated. Right? So it's kind of yes and no that he's going to be vindicated. We see in the end that he is vindicated, okay, because of the way he handled it. But no, he wasn't vindicated in terms of the fact that there wasn't something that he needed to change. So the other thing that we do still need to reiterate in that vein is that in all of this, he had not cursed God to his face. So he continues to have confidence in God. Verse 15 and 16, he says, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. He also shall be my salvation, for a hypocrite could not come before him. So he's saying, okay, yeah, even though I'm in this situation, even though I'm being slayed, as it were, metaphorically, and even to a large degree, even physically, he believed that he was actually going to die, he still trusted in God, that God was in control, that God was doing something, and that God was there. And his faith in that respect never wavered. But he also looked to God and continued to believe that God was his salvation, but he still held to the view that, again, he wasn't being a hypocrite. He wasn't saying that this is the way he should be and doing something else. He was saying it, and he believed that he was doing everything. So in the end here of chapter 13, he asks two things of God. Verse 19 and 20 says, who is he who will contend with me? If now I hold my tongue, I perish. Only two things do not do to me. Then I will not hide myself from you. He says, can you give me relief from this trial? And just tell me what I did wrong in this. This is all he wants to know. But just because you demand it of God doesn't mean it's going to happen. Because God is indeed working in our lives, and he's working to an end. Okay? And just because we don't know it doesn't mean that God is not there. He is always there. He's always in our lives doing those things. So, I'm just looking to see where we are, how much time. So let me I'll do this then. Just finish up chapter 14 real quick here. And what we see then is that Job starts focusing on death again. He said it would just be nice to die and wait for the resurrection. Okay, so a couple things here. First, let's read verses 12 through 14 to see that. It says, so man lies down and does not rise till the heavens are no more. They will not awake nor be roused from their sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait till my change comes. So again, what we see here is that Job has an understanding of the resurrection, that you die and you wait till your appointed time for God to come. We also see that there's an obvious peace that comes with death, and that it would be nice to sometimes just die and wait for the return of Christ. And this is what he wants, because then he knows that the wrath that God is, as he sees it, exerting on him would be over. He wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. And he once again refers to the hard service. So it was definitely an allusion to him that he's been going through all these things, and that's why he deserved the wages before. But now he's just going, okay, I've done the hard service, and I will wait until that reward comes, till my change comes, and I get the gift of salvation and the reward that comes for the works that I've done. Now, it's interesting here that we so often worry about dying. We worry about these types of things, and yet here it is, just the opposite, is that God is not going to let Job die, even though Job wants to die. So the point is that whether you want to die or not, okay, God is not going to let you die until He is finished with whatever it is that he is accomplishing in you. So as we, again, move forward through our lives, we don't worry about death, because God, even if you want it, God won't give it to you. Okay, so if you still want life, then of course, he's going to keep it until your time is up. So just know that God started this good thing in your life. He's going to continue doing it, and that he will finish it and be with you until the end. And then verses 15 and 16, he says, "You shall call and I will answer you. You shall desire the work of your hands. For now you number my steps, but do not watch over my sin." So again, he says that God is in his life. He knows that God's in his life, even to this point, of metaphorically numbering the steps that he has left. And so he knows that, God's not going to let this until it's time, no matter how much Job wants it. So I think we're going to leave it there. And it gives us a good start into the book of Job and kind of what's happening. We're laying the groundwork and the foundation for what is happening with Job, what is happening with the others, which are a big part of it. And again, there are all these lessons that are to be learned. So we'll pick up again in chapter 15, and we'll actually end up going pretty quickly through quite a few more chapters here, in terms of just touching on the highlights, touching on significant verses within a chapter, and not spending too much time till we get to some of the lessons that they have to learn and that we do too.